On paper, India is the world's fastest-growing major economy. Over half of its population is under 30, creating a massive demographic dividend that has fueled rapid industrial expansion and towering corporate valuations in major tech hubs. But looking closely at the data reveals a severe disconnect. National GDP is skyrocketing upward, but formal job creation for new university graduates is flatlining at the bottom. The modern sectors driving this immense wealth generation rely heavily on automation and hyper-specialized technology. They require specific, localized skills rather than mass labor, leaving them unable to absorb the millions of young professionals entering the workforce every year. This leaves highly educated youth, engineers, computer scientists, and master's degree holders with very few options. Many are forced to accept systemic underemployment, queuing for hours to secure entry-level gig work or low-paying administrative roles. A booming top-line economy means very little if the actual citizens generating that momentum cannot secure a livable wage. The wealth is concentrating at the top, leaving a generation of graduates completely locked out of the prosperity they were promised. Locked out of the modern private sector, millions of young Indians turn their attention to the only viable alternative for economic stability: permanent government employment. The sheer volume of applicants has created an overwhelming bottleneck. Millions of candidates are now competing for a fraction of a percent of available public sector positions, funneled into a massive, rigid examination infrastructure. The pressure to succeed here takes an immense toll. Families regularly drain their savings and take on heavy, high-interest debt to fund years of specialized coaching for their children, hoping to secure that single-digit selection rate. These entrance exams serve as the singular threshold for a generation's economic survival. They represent a high-stakes point of failure where years of family sacrifice meet a selection process with a sub-1% success rate. In mid-2026, the immense pressure within this bottleneck finally fractured the system. Following massive security breaches, national authorities abruptly canceled crucial entry gates, including the NEET UG and regional teacher eligibility tests. Investigations identified highly organized interstate cheating syndicates operating deep within the examination infrastructure. These groups systematically bypass the security of national entry gates. These networks utilize sophisticated digital tools to capture secure exam papers and distribute them across state lines instantly. For the student body, the implication was devastating. The grueling hours of study and crushing financial debt meant nothing if wealthy applicants could bypass the meritocracy entirely. The revelation shattered the psychological endurance of a youth demographic that had bet their family's entire net worth on a system they now realized was heavily compromised. When the systems designed to ensure fairness collapse, the accumulated despair of an entire generation has nowhere to go but outward, turning years of silent anxiety into explosive, directed anger aimed straight at the institutional boards. By the summer of 2026, this outrage organized into a unique political demonstration known as the Cockroach Movement, led by a satirical faction calling itself the Cockroach Janta Party. What began as an online campaign quickly mobilized into physical space. Protesters descended on the heart of the nation's capital, setting up indefinite encampments near the red Samrat Yantra sundial at Jantar Mantar. Thousands of students, activists, and civil society members marched through the streets. They carried banners, wore paper masks, and demanded structural accountability for the shattered examination process. The insect was chosen as a deliberate, dark satire. It was a direct response to institutional rhetoric that consistently ignored their grievances, effectively treating millions of unemployed youth as negligible pests to be brushed aside. The scope of the protests expanded rapidly. Beyond localized anger over specific paper leaks, the crowds demanded the immediate resignation of top officials and a complete overhaul of national examination governance. Rather than immediately reforming the physical security of the examination centers, government authorities shifted their strategy to containing the digital fallout. In June 2026, they executed a massive digital strike, placing a temporary platform-wide suspension on the messaging application Telegram, where the cheating syndicates were widely operating. To justify the blackout, officials invoked Section 69A of the Information Technology Act, targeting the digital intermediary platforms used to distribute the leaked materials. Platform representatives and civil liberties groups fiercely criticized the move. They argued it was a disproportionate response that disconnected millions of legitimate users instead of performing the difficult police work required to isolate the actual culprits. The crisis had mutated. A failure in analog, localized educational infrastructure was now triggering severe national-level digital censorship, deeply entangling India's domestic schooling issues with global digital governance. The trajectory of this crisis reveals a clear chain reaction. A constricted economic bottleneck forced millions into a compromised examination system, which eventually collapsed and triggered widespread digital suppression. It forces a hard reevaluation of India's highly praised demographic dividend. A massive young population is not an automatic economic engine. Without systemic support, it is a significant liability. Sustaining India's economic progression requires absolute institutional transparency and a labor market capable of actually employing its citizens. Growth is only impactful if it restores public trust. Failing to secure these foundational institutions carries a heavy cost. If the millions of educated youth driving this country forward are left without a viable future, India risks turning its greatest demographic asset directly against itself.